Well, friends, Judge Chutkan just set a speedy trial date in Donald Trump's federal prosecution in Washington, D.C. for trying to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, I was in court for Donald Trump's status hearing in his criminal prosecution in D.C. involving his attempt to overturn the presidential election. And I can tell you, there was a lot of heat in the courtroom. But it was all coming from the defense side of the courtroom, where all of Donald Trump's criminal defense attorneys had assembled. So what I want to focus on in today's Justice Matters video is what I saw in that courtroom that I would characterize as poor lawyering. Not trying to be unkind, but I have to call it the way I see it. Donald Trump's lead defense attorney, this guy, John Lauro, when he stood up and started addressing Judge Chutkan, he started loud and he only got louder. In fact, twice during the hearing, Judge Chutkan had to tell him to, quote, turn the temperature down. You know, Lauro just engaged in bomb throwing. He said, this is a show trial. This is a political prosecution. This is a grave injustice. You know, he may have believed he was throwing red meat to Donald Trump's base, but he was not persuading Judge Chutkan, right? He was not making arguments based on the facts, based on the law, based on some reasonable estimate of how much time he would need to prepare for trial. He was just throwing bombs and being loud. You know, interestingly, Judge Chutkan started the hearing by saying the prosecutors, Jack Smith and his team, are asking for a January 2nd, 2024 trial date. The defense is asking for an April 2026 trial date. She said point blank, neither of those two trial dates is appropriate. So I thought, oof, maybe she's going to do the Solomonic thing, kind of split the difference, if not the baby, and maybe come down somewhere in the middle. So what she did was she asked John Lauro, listen, propose a reasonable trial date, a trial date that will give you enough time to prepare, but she said, this case is not going to trial in 2026. Give me a reasonable alternate proposal. And John Lauro wouldn't do it. She asked him a number of times. She gave him a number of opportunities. And here's what he ultimately said to the judge. Quote, we can't do this trial in anything less than the time we proposed. Close quote. I might be off on that quote by a word or two. I was furiously scribbling notes the whole time. But, you know, he just kind of brazenly, stubbornly, almost disrespectfully wouldn't even give the judge an alternative, you know, a more reasonable proposed trial date. So she again said, yeah, well, this trial is not going in 2026. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to set a trial date for March 4th, 2024. Gives the defense about 6 or 7 months to prepare. She said this is a single defendant case, not a big multi-defendant case. It involves only 4 criminal charges, not 40, not 140. She said, interestingly, I used to try murder cases across the street in Superior Court, and I have some sense of how long it takes to prepare to go to trial. You may have heard me say in the past, friends, that I tried cases against Tanya Chutkan when she was a public defender and I was an assistant U.S. attorney prosecuting murder cases in the District of Columbia. So she knows whereof she speaks. And you know, there were some interesting things that unfolded. For example, John Lauro said, "Your Honor, we haven't had any time to prepare. I haven't even begun reviewing the evidence. I've had absolutely no time to even think about how I'm going to defend my client, Donald Trump." And when the prosecutor got an opportunity to talk and address and rebut some of what John Lauro said, and let me add that the two prosecutors representing the people of the United States, Thomas Windham and Molly Gaston, did we the people proud. And friends, I'm not saying this because I'm a former career prosecutor. Sometimes I see prosecutors perform poorly and I call them out. Sometimes I see defense attorneys perform marvelously and I compliment them. But this was poor lawyering by John Lauro and very steady, thoughtful, circumspect, informed lawyering by the prosecutors. Here's one of the reasons I say that. After Lauro went on and on about how he hasn't even been able to think about what the defense may be, never mind review documents and prepare the defense, Molly Gaston got to respond to some of what John Lauro had said. She said, "Your Honor, it's interesting that he said he's had no time or opportunity to begin preparing because Mr. Lauro gave a media interview and he said, and I quote, 'I've read Mike Pence's book not once but twice, and I'm already drafting my cross-examination for Mike Pence, who I know will testify as a government witness.' So it sounds like he has begun preparing. Sounds like his preparation is well underway." That's just one example of how the facts defeated the histrionics. And I appreciate the lawyering by both Thomas Windham and Molly Gaston. So near the conclusion of the hearing, after Judge Chutkan set a speedy trial date, after Judge Chutkan observed that the people, the American voters, also have an interest in a speedy trial date, not just the defendant, but the people have a right to have this case promptly resolved. John Lauro was visibly displeased, upset, angry, agitated at the fact that the judge had set a March 2024 trial date, and he did a couple of things that were sort of unbefitting of a lawyer practicing in federal court or anywhere, because federal court is no better than state court. In fact, state courts are where the hard work of justice really goes on day in and day out, because 98% of the criminal cases are handled in state courts, and maybe 2%, a very small fraction of the criminal cases are handled in federal court. So I would never demean or be disrespectful of the state court prosecutors or practices or defense attorneys. But I thought Lauro did something that was unbefitting of any attorney. He said, "Your Honor, that's a ridiculous trial date," I'm paraphrasing now, "and if we are forced to go to trial in March, we will not have enough time to prepare and we will be ineffective. We will render ineffective assistance of counsel." That's a hollow threat. That's nonsense. You don't say that you intend to or you expect to be ineffective in the assistance you render your client. And then he did something that was arguably even worse. In the run-up to a trial, any trial, you have a series of status hearings. And that is entirely routine. You don't just, arraign somebody and then 6 months later have a trial date. You have a series of status hearings to accomplish things, to move through motions, to address issues, legal issues, scheduling issues. And so the judge predictably said, Mr. Lauro, would you please propose the next status hearing date that works for your calendar? And he said, no, I don't see the point of a status hearing date. He threw a tantrum like a child, unbefitting of a lawyer. And I don't think any of this will put him in a good place in the eyes of Judge Chutkan. When he won't answer questions that she asks him repeatedly, when he, throws a tantrum and won't even give her a date for the next proposed status hearing, that will not serve him well, and it will not serve his client well. But she took it in stride. Judge Chutkan said, fine, you'll see my minute order with the next scheduled status hearing date. Anything else we need to address? Court adjourned. So the bottom line is we saw some poor lawyering. We saw some fine lawyering. I do believe the American people will be extremely well represented in the prosecution of Donald Trump. And we saw a judge who understands the need to move this case to trial expeditiously because, as she said, the people have a right to a speedy trial, not just the defendant. And if there is one thing that Tanya Chutkan knows, it's that justice matters. Friends, we're getting there. Please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.